difficulty of a language depends on one thing: how different or similar it is to the languages you already speak. The learning process is always the same, but there are some things that you need to do differently if the language is very different from the ones you already speak, especially in the beginning. Let's look at some examples.
Okay, first example. This is Catalan. Very similar to Spanish, also quite similar to French. I basically could understand every word here without checking the first time I read this. So, no need to memorize vocabulary with associations. I could straight away jump into massive input, start getting as much input as possible, start reading and listening as much content as possible every single day, getting as many reps as possible, go fast, do more, uh, just input. This is what you do with the languages that are very easy because they're very similar with the ones you already speak. Next example. This is Danish. I've never studied Danish, but I speak German fluently, and this looks very similar. I think I can recognize most of the words here simply because how similar they look to German and some of them even to English. So I think I won't need to memorize most of the vocab here with associations. I simply start reading and listening, go as fast as I can, get as many reps as I can of input, and memorize some words that are different with associations, but for the most part, I won't have to do that. If you don't speak German, obviously you'll have to associate more words. The next language is Czech, and it looks pretty cool. You probably don't understand anything if you don't speak Slavic languages, but if you speak Russian or Ukrainian or Polish or something like that, you'll probably recognize a lot of this, not only the vocabulary but also the grammar, which is pretty complicated in Slavic languages. But if you learn one of them, the others are not as hard. This is slightly more difficult for me than Catalan and Danish, but again, because I already speak one Slavic language, I'm confident I will learn this pretty quickly. I don't need to memorize much in terms of vocabulary here because it all looks very similar or relatively similar to Polish, Ukrainian, and Russian. Now we're getting into the difficult languages. This is Hungarian, which is not a Slavic language. I don't think it's related to any other European language. And you can tell because it's very different. I can't recognize almost any word here. I think this is work. Sounds kind of similar in Romanian. I guess the
Munkája.
yeah, and this is probably car. I know because I know the story, but otherwise it'd be
Autójával.
very hard to guess what anything here means. Which means that this is going to be much more difficult. It can be done, however. The difference at first is going to be the use of associations. You will have to memorize a lot of the vocabulary with associations, especially nouns and verbs. Yeah. So this is work, this is car. I guess, yeah, we go word by word and we associate them. We do it with the first 20, 30 keywords, and then we start reading and listening. Then we do it with the next story. We associate the words and we read and listen. Then with the next one and with the next one. So first we associate the vocabulary, then we start reading and listening to the stories. This is going to be much slower because associating the vocab is a slow process. But after a few days of doing this, you will have memorized a few hundred words. And if you've been reading and listening the text and the audio files over and over again, it's going to get easier and easier. You'll recognize more and more. You don't need to learn the grammar. I don't know how Hungarian grammar works, but I will learn simply by learning the vocab and then reading and listening to the text and audio over and over again until I understand the grammar and context, right? The difference between this and the previous languages that were similar to the ones I already speak is that in the previous ones, I could start reading and listening straight away and get as much of that as possible, as many reps as possible from the very beginning. Here, we have to first memorize a lot of vocab, but we memorize vocab and get the input with the same vocab at the same time, right? So we memorize some vocab, we get some input with that vocab. We memorize some more vocab, we get extra input with the same vocab, etc. Basically, what I don't want you to do is memorize the vocab of the whole series of mini stories and then start reading and listening to the whole thing. No, maybe memorize the vocab of one or two or five or 10, as many as you can every day, or as many as you want to, but also get input in all of those. Like read them all, listen to them all. And the next day you memorize more vocab and you listen and read the previous ones and the new ones and so on. Again, association for memorization should be to allow you to get the input, but the input is super necessary, right? Don't think that you can memorize 100 words a day and learn 10,000 words in a couple of months and that's it. No, you need the input. Otherwise, you will forget the words and also you will not learn the grammar. And you will not learn the proper pronunciation either if you're not getting enough listening. We get to the highest level of difficulty. This is a language that is completely different from the ones you already speak. Different vocabulary, different grammar, different pronunciation, and also it's got a completely different writing system, which means not only that you don't know the words, but also you can't read it at all. In this case, you shouldn't start learning to read. The best thing to do is to get this transcribed in a way that you can understand, and then you start memorizing the words phonetically, either by listening to them and associating them by ear or by writing them down using your own writing system, Roman alphabet for most of us, and you learn them and then you start doing a lot of listening practice, a lot of input, and eventually you learn to understand the language by memorizing vocab and listening and speaking. But you don't learn to read and write until you're able to understand the spoken language and you're able to speak it. This is the highest level of difficulty when it comes to language learning, but it can be done. The most important thing here is learning vocabulary, and a lot of it early, phonetically. Do not get obsessed with the writing system because it will make you spend a lot of time and a lot of energy and you'll get very little results. If you want to understand and speak the language well, focus on learning vocab, listening, and speaking.
And these are just some examples. You can apply these principles to any language you're trying to learn. What's important is that the path you have to follow is always the same. The only difference, some extra obstacles in the initial stages in the more difficult languages. Obstacles that you can overcome with the right techniques. The only difference is that some languages will have extra obstacles that are especially relevant in the initial stages. You get the writing system, you get vocabulary, you get grammar, and you get pronunciation. But all these obstacles can be overcome if you do the right things. Language learning is not that complicated. There is a solution for every problem.